Supposed to be. We were not meant to live in the house of fear. We were meant to live in the house of joy, the house of love. So I'd like to talk today about how you can change your address and stop living in the house of fear and move into the house of joy. But I'd like Or a man, like Laura's children's sermon, a man is being chased by a bear. A man is being chased by a bear. Is that good fear or bad? That's good fear. It'll make him run fast. But there's another man, and he's being chased by a mouse. Good fear or bad? If you ask my wife, that's good fear, but it's not. It's just a little mouse. A child is about to touch the stove, and you scream at the top of your voice, "Stop!" Is the child's fear good fear or bad fear? It's good fear, isn't it? But there's a 35-year-old who cannot get to sleep without his little blankie and doll. Is that good fear or bad? That's bad fear, isn't it? Sometimes it's hard to tell whether it's good fear or bad. You finally picked out the perfect clothing that you want to wear, regardless of what your wife says it looks like. As you go into the living room to see the rest of your family, is that good fear or bad fear? It depends if you're the wife or the husband. It's a little bit of both, isn't it? All I'm trying to say is that we are meant to live with joy and not anxiety, with love and not with fear. We are supposed to be content and not anxious. But it's a problem because we are filled with fear. And part of the problem for me is that the answer to how do we get joy all the time, it's a secret. Remember, Paul is a responsive theologian. He writes a letter to a little church, a tiny little church in Philippi. And the reason that he writes is to thank them because they have found out that he's in prison and they've sent him a little gift. Probably some food, maybe a servant to help him while he's there, some money so that he can buy some of the things he needs. And at the end of the letter, he says thank you. He says this. He says, "I rejoiced greatly in the Lord that at last you renewed your concern for me. I'm not saying this because I'm in need, because I have learned to be content whatever the circumstance. Whatever it is. I know what it is to be in need. I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret." There it is, the secret. I have learned the secret of being content, the secret of joy in every and any circumstance, whether I am well fed or hungry, whether I'm living in plenty or in want. I've learned the secret. And just in case you think that's hyperbole, let me give you a little snapshot of the Apostle Paul another time that he's in jail. Paul goes all over the Roman Empire. The only thing that seems to happen is that he gets thrown in jail. Well, remember, he just wrote to this group of believers in Philippi. There was a time where he was in a jail in Philippi at the very start of that church. And while he is in jail, something amazing happens. Listen to this. The crowd joined in the attack against Paul and Silas. And the judge ordered them stripped and beaten. After they were severely flogged, Paul and Silas were thrown into prison, and the jailer put them in the inmost cell and fastened their feet in the stocks. It probably looked like this. He fastened that's hard to see, but They're in the jail, and their feet are in chains in the stocks. Well, how does he respond? It says this: about midnight, Paul and Silas are in jail in the stocks. They are praying and they are singing hymns to God. And the other prisoners were listening to them. Of course they were. The other prisoners were terrified. And these two are praying out loud and singing as if they were at Sunday school. I need that secret. You need that secret. Because we both live lives that are filled with stress. God wants us to have not stress-filled lives, but joy-filled lives, regardless of your circumstances. There's a famous quote in my country that says, sometimes God calms the storm. But usually, God lets the storm roar and tries to calm the hearts of his children. How calm is your heart in the middle of the storm today? Sometimes God calms the storms, but usually God lets the storm roar so he can calm the hearts of his children. How calm is your heart today? How filled with joy? If somebody was going to ask you this last week, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being joy, so you're jumping around all the time, and 1 being despair, so you're thinking about running out into traffic, between 1 and 10, are you filled more with joy or with anxiety? I would like, as we say in my country, I would like to stop preaching and to start meddling. I would like to start interfering with your life. And the way I'm going to do that today is by handing every one of you a card. Bob in the back and up here in the front, Tomoko has both cards and pencils. There are some, I think, up in the balcony also. I would love it if every person here grabbed one of the cards and grabbed a pencil as well. And just because I know that some of you are like me and you cannot read the small print, I had some of the cards made big so that Gabriel and I could read them. And if anybody else would like an extra size card, this one's for you. Okay? Gabriel says he needs the extra large size. I want to make sure that everybody gets a pencil as well as a card. There should be enough for everybody. I think we have plenty. But this is so that you can assess, you can still assess whether you have discovered the secret of joy. Have you discovered the secret of joy? I found the secret of joy. It was in that same thank you letter where he says, I have discovered the secret of joy in all circumstances, good or bad, plenty or want, terrible and great days. I have found the secret of joy, of contentment, whatever. I would like to describe to you the secret today. It comes from this same letter. While this is being passed out, I'll tell you what it is, and then we'll read it together, okay? The very first week we were here, you may not remember this if you were not here. The very first week we were here, Laura mocked me because I have a terrible time remembering people's names. I have a terrible time memorizing the scriptures. I want so much to memorize it, and it goes in one ear and it goes out the other, and that may be because there's nothing in between this ear and this ear. It goes right through. But I wanted to learn this secret. And so one time, almost 30 years ago now, I was in a Bible study with a group of men. And I said, guys, this is a really important verse. Can we learn it together? And we learned it one sentence at a time. It took us several weeks. And we were embarrassed because we felt like we were in third grade. Okay, everybody, what's this week's line? And sooner or later, with some stuttering, all the men in the group could do it. It starts out easy. It starts out, rejoice. Rejoice in the Lord always. I say it again, rejoice. Let your gentleness be known to all. for the Lord is near. And don't worry about anything. But in every circumstance, with thanksgiving, pray. And make your requests known to God. And the peace of God that passes all understanding will guard your hearts and mind in Christ Jesus. And then it goes on. And it says, finally, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, if anything is lovely, whatever is admirable or excellent or praiseworthy, think about these things. Whatever you've learned from me, whatever you've received from me, whatever you've seen in me, put this into practice. And the God of peace will be with you. 30 years, I've been trying to say that every week so that it would go from my head to my heart, because it is the secret of joy. It starts out very easy with this word rejoice. We're going to talk about that in a second. But first, I'd like us to read this together. We're going to put it up on the screen. I'm going to read the top sentence. You're going to read the bottom sentence, okay? So it starts out, that's the last one. Let's go back to the beginning. There we go. Starts out, I'll start with the top. Rejoice in the Lord always. I'll say it again, rejoice.
Let your gentleness be evident to all, for the Lord is near.
Don't be anxious about anything, but pray about everything with thanksgiving, presenting your request to God.
Let the peace of God, which passes all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus.
My brothers and sisters, whatever is true or noble, whatever is right or pure, if anything is lovely or admirable, whatever is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things.
Whatever you have heard or received or heard from me or seen in me, put that into practice. And the
God of peace. Let's read that last one together again.
And the God of peace will be with you.
I only have peace if the God of peace is with me. Because I'm a confused, scared little bear. And unless the big bear is right behind me, ready to hold me and give me peace, I will not have it. Let's look again at the very first word. It's on your card. The very first word, it says, rejoice. Rejoice in the Lord always. I say again, rejoice. Now let's just define that for a second. As I thought about what rejoice means, I believe that rejoicing, you are commanded to rejoice. You cannot rejoice if you do not recognize something that you can give thanks for. Rejoicing starts with looking around you and say, well, I may have lost the car, but golly, I can still see the road. I'm glad I can see the road. I found something I can give thanks for. So it begins, rejoicing begins with recognizing something that gives you joy. It gives me joy to see Pilatus. And then rejoicing means not just recognizing something, it means expressing that out loud. To rejoice means that I tell somebody. So rejoicing in the Lord means I tell God. God, thank you for the beauty of the mountains. Thank you that my wife forgave me. Thank you that my children are healthy. Thank you for whatever it is. When we rejoice always, we recognize something that gives us joy and we express it. The Apostle Paul is the apostle of joy. Whenever I start to think that my stress level is too high, I remember that the Apostle Paul wrote The Secret of Contentment while he was in prison. When Paul says, don't worry about anything, he's chained up against the wall. When Paul says the peace of God will guard his heart, he's looking at a Roman guard. Paul understands worry. Paul experiences joy. Paul understands fear. He experiences contentment. This is not supposed to be an intellectual exercise where we take notes and agree that, yes, when we believe in God, we will have joy. It's not the way it works. First, just the way we rejoice, we recognize something that gives us joy, we also have to recognize something that scares us, something that causes anxiety in us. So I'd like you to take that card and turn it over. This is where you need your pencils. Unless you are blind or a coward or mentally unstable, you are afraid of something. There is something that makes you anxious. I challenge you right here, right now, to write it down. Maybe it's just one word or two. Maybe there are two things or three. There's space there for a couple. I would ask you to write down what it is that you get anxious about. When anxiety returns, what fear can take the joy out of your life? Maybe you're young like those kids that came up, and you'd write down that you're afraid of the dark, or you're afraid of bullies at school. You're afraid you're never going to be one of the popular kids. You're afraid your parents yell at each other too much. Or you're an older student. We have a lot of students here. You're an older student. You don't know what you're going to do when you get through with school. You're anxious about not getting the right job. You're beginning to be anxious about not meeting the right person. And you who are adults, what's your anxiety? It seems to always come back to money or work or relationships. You might worry, some of you, if you were honest, that your faith is fake. You're not really sure if this is true or not, or that you're fake. Maybe you're worried about your health when cancer seems to strike everybody that you know. What's anxious in your heart over and over? Some of us are older. Many concerned, worried about your kids or your parents who are dying. Some of you worry about retirement, looming on the horizon, or what you'll do now, or your body is starting to ache or fall apart. You're worried because your loved one is ill, or someone that you love has died. Or maybe you're worried because you think the money will run out before you do. Many of us have anxiety in different areas of our life. Please, just don't leave that blank. Write down one thing, because unless you are thinking about something specific that you are anxious about, this whole sermon, will just sound like, don't worry, be happy. And that works as a children's song, but it's not going to help you at 3 o'clock on Thursday afternoon when you're worried. If God can help you with this anxiety, you might believe that God's intent is not for you to live in fear. I believe that Paul gives 3 or 4 hints about joy instead of anxiety in this passage, and I'd like you to go over them with me. The first one, look at the other side. After Paul has talked about rejoicing and gentleness, Paul says, don't be anxious about anything. Probably that does not mean don't ever feel afraid. Don't ever be anxious. What Paul probably is saying here is don't remain anxious. Recognize that you're getting afraid. Don't remain anxious. But instead, pray. With thanksgiving and praise, make your request known to God. You want to know what keeps anxiety at bay? The Apostle Paul would say in one word, what keeps anxiety at bay is prayer. Thanksgiving-filled prayer. But it only keeps anxiety away for the hour. Prayer only keeps anxiety away for the day. Thanksgiving-filled prayer. Ruth Bell Graham is the wife of the famous evangelist Billy Graham. And she knows a lot about what worry is about. She says that worry and worship cannot live in the same heart at the same time. We can talk to God and not worry, or we can worry about life and not talk to God. Worship and worry cannot live in the same heart at the same time, but here's the other secret. Worship and worry keep trading places. Paul says, pray all the time with thanksgiving. The reason thanksgiving is one of those spiritual practices is because when we talk to God, we remember the faithfulness of God. Thanksgiving-filled prayer reminds us that God is here, right now. And prayer with thankfulness reminds us that God has been here in the past. The bear stood behind you and ready to hold you at the worst moments of your life. The bear will never leave you. God is with you. You counter anxieties with specific prayers filled with thanksgiving. My sense is that lasts for a day. When I pray, I'm not anxious on Monday, but when I wake up, it's Tuesday and my fears return. One of the reasons that you are called to come into this building or other buildings around the world like it, one of the reasons Christians are called to worship every seventh day is to be reminded that there is a God. Because we forget by Wednesday. Or we believe it in our head, but our heart has forgotten. One of the reasons we worship together is so that we can pray. But I don't want to live on a yo-yo string for the rest of my life, going between terror and delight. How do you begin to replace anxiety with joy, regardless of the circumstance? I think you pray for the day. But the secret to a life filled with joy, regardless of circumstances, that pushes fear out to the borders, is what comes next. It's an academic phrase. This is an academic phrase. He says it a different way. The academic phrase is by Dr. Archibald Hart. It's called the law of cognition. The law of cognition is very simple. You are what you think. You become what you think. Dr. Hart, in his quote, says, research has shown that one's thought life influences every aspect of their being. Kind people are simply the type of people who habitually tend to think kind thoughts. Angry people are simply the kind of people who habitually tend to think thoughts that breed hostility and resentment. You are what you think. The proverb says, as a man thinketh, so he is. Jesus says, a good tree will not bear bad fruit, and a bad tree will not bear good fruit. You are what you think. And that's exactly what the Apostle Paul talks about. He says, finally, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, if anything is lovely, or admirable, or excellent, or praiseworthy. Can you tell I've memorized those? Think about those things. Don't remember the list. Think about what it means to fix your mind on something that is excellent. That's not where my mind usually goes. My mind usually goes to, is there enough money? Will my children finally obey me? Is that twinge in my back a tumor? I wonder if they like me. I have to redirect my mind. The Apostle Paul said, if I want to start to live life as a joy-filled follower of Jesus, instead of fear-filled, I need to begin to think about the things that God offers that focus me on the goodness of God. Now, this is where you ought to, on your card, turn over and just write 3 letters. Y, B, H. Y, B, H. Everybody got that? I have told you that your life will transform from fear to joy if you think about these things. You know what YBH stands for? Yes, but how? How do I do that? It's easy to say it, but how do I think about these things all through the week? do part 2 in 2 weeks. We're coming back here in 2 weeks, and I'm going to show you in one sermon how you can train your mind on the good, the pure, the lovely, the excellent, the praiseworthy. Because if you don't know how, who cares that it's true? It may be true, but if you don't know how, you're like the little boy who's in the kitchen with his mom, and his mom says, "Honey, would you please go and get the can of soup out of the closet?" Well, the closet is big and dark, and the soup is at the far back. And the little boy says, "Well, Mom, I don't think so. The closet is big and dark, and it's all the way at the back." And the mom says, "That's okay, honey. Jesus will be with you in there. Jesus is everywhere. Just go in there, and Jesus will be with you." And so the little boy goes to the door. You can tell he's going, "I don't know. I just don't know." He opens the door, and he leaves, and he goes, "Hey, Jesus, throw out some soup, would you please?" When we don't know how to think, fear takes over. "Jesus, if you're really there, throw me a can of soup." So now you have to come back in 2 weeks. How can you become more convinced that Jesus is with us? How can you become less afraid? How can you, however your marriage is, however your job is, however your health is, however your faith is, how can you be more filled with joy? The Apostle Paul has talked about 3 things. He says, pray in ways that you're thankful. Second, fill your mind. Chew on what's true, noble, right, pure, lovely, admirable, excellent, praiseworthy. And 3, he says, spend time with people who are a little further down the journey of being peace-filled. Spend time so that you can learn from people who have more joy. I am not a naturally joyous person. I tend to be an introvert and a little bit solemn. My wife says my emotional range goes from 1 to 1A. Whereas my wife goes like this. So I am not naturally going to do this, but it is by living with followers of Jesus that I have discovered more of joy. Paul says, whatever you have learned, whatever you have received, whatever you've heard from me, whatever you've seen me do, put that into practice. Spend time with followers of Jesus that are starting to become more joyful and practice what you see them doing. Put it into practice, and the God of peace will be with you. You know why? Because fear is very contagious. And you are spending your life with people that are afraid. You're spending the rest of your week with people that are afraid. Does anyone remember the name Nikita Khrushchev? Raise your hand if you remember that. He was the premier of the Soviet Union. He is famous in America for coming to the United Nations and taking his shoe off and banging it on the Pope. But in Russia, he is famous for being the prime minister, the premier, after Stalin. Stalin, who ruled with an iron fist and began to become paranoid and killed everyone who disagreed, and then started to kill even people he thought might disagree, tens of millions of people. And the Soviet Union died because Stalin thought they were out to get him. Khrushchev comes next. And for a while, he has nothing but good things to say about Stalin. But after some time, when he feels that he's more established, he starts to say, we shouldn't always be like Stalin was. We shouldn't do everything that Stalin did. Trust me, I'm not going to lead like Stalin. You don't have to worry about me. Some of the things that Stalin did were plainly bad. He's speaking to 1,000 people, and he's starting to say, this is a new Russia, it's not Stalin's Russia, and in the back, somewhere back there, the voice yells out, why didn't you say this back then? And Khrushchev stops. He comes around, and he yells at the top of the voice, who said that? Come on, stand up. Who said that? And then he goes back. he says, now you know why I didn't speak up. He admitted that he was afraid. And fear is contagious. Fear stops people from doing the courageous things. But you know what? Joy is contagious too. Whatever you have heard or seen or learned from me, put it into practice, and the God of peace will be with you. Let me just finish with a story of two benches that ought to be in every church. They are in many American churches, especially during the time of the frontier. The first bench is back at the door. It's just a plain, ordinary bench that would be in any church. And it sits at the back door. And the reason that it's there is because, not all the time, but occasionally, one of you, would ask a friend who doesn't usually come to church to come. And the person would say, okay, I'll see you there Sunday. What time is it? You'd say it's 10:30. And they would invite the person to come to church. And they'd stand at the back door where Bob usually stands, and they'd look out for their friend to come. Well, maybe she doesn't know how to get here. Maybe the traffic was bad. Maybe one of the kids was slow getting out. And 10:30 turns into 10:35, turns into 10:40. And the friend has not shown up. And so the person sits down on that bench. And everybody that walks in late sees that person sitting on the bench, and they know Veronica invited somebody to come, and they haven't come. She's waiting for them. They started to call it the fool's bench. You were a fool to think that they'd actually come. You were a fool to think that they would actually come. And in many churches, the fool's bench stayed empty because people stopped inviting people. But in other churches, all of a sudden there would be two people sitting on the fool's bench because two people invited them. And the fool's bench became a place of honor. It became the place that you go when you care more about your neighbors than you do about being embarrassed. The fool's bench became where the people who love Jesus sat in the back, inviting and waiting for their friends to come. I think every church ought to have a fool's bench. And I think you ought to invite people and sit on it and wait for them to come, so that they might discover the joy that can be found in places like this. I said every church ought to have two benches. The other bench in these American revivalist churches. You know, revivalist churches is when periodically someone new would come into town and the preacher would preach for an entire week in a row, and revival might come to that church.